who are you as an individual that pulls for somebody to be withdrawn or more self-expressed? And I can remember talking to one of my managers for an MLB team, and we had a little incident in the clubhouse when one of our sort of all-star pitchers spoke to the media about a subject that was clearly really meant to be in-house, sort of in the confines of the locker room. And so the manager was kind of pissed, and upset that this had now gone through a journalist and was sort of out there in the public domain. And so he was looking directly at the pitcher from the perspective of judgment and criticism, like he is the cause of my suffering and my frustration, which is how most people react to life, right? Like I'm upset because of what they did or what happened, sure, which is all the illusion. And I said, okay, well, I understand where you're coming from and I get that you're upset, but can I ask you a few questions so I could get into his world, right? So I'm listening. He's like, sure. I said, tell me a little bit about your relationship with the pitcher. He's like, well, what do you mean? I said, well, to what degree do you think you hold a space that is safe and open and inviting for him to come to you? And, he was, kudos to him, he was honest. He said, well, we don't have the best relationship. And, and I cited a couple of altercations they'd had earlier in the season. He's like, yeah, I mean, I was pretty hard on him and whatever. And I said, so could you see that perhaps when it relates to a topic that for him is heartfelt, because it was a sensitive issue, where is your role in recognizing that he felt more comfortable talking to a journalist than he did to you? And that's where he became a better manager at that moment. I said, so maybe your opportunity is to use this as a catalyst to see that perhaps as a leader, which you are as the manager of this clubhouse, your capacity to listen isn't as great as perhaps you might proclaim it to be. And you can clean it up with him and say, hey, thank you for showing me that I perhaps am not the greatest listener for you, and I'd like to change that. So then he became a better leader. So with regards to people being withdrawn, we could say more depressed, or somebody being overly verbose or anxious, I would say, yes, some of that's generated by virtue of their conditioning, but it's also based on the environment they're speaking into. And so that's where people really have some say in the way that a relationship goes, because we often think, well, the relationship I have with that person is over there with them, whether they're a nice person or a bad person or however you want to declare it. But the relationship is actually with us, because the way we view someone is the container within which we communicate to them. So if you're like, oh, Bob, he's awesome. It's like you talk to Bob from a position of like, that's a human being who's awesome. If, Mary is a pain in my ass, then you speak to Mary from that position. But the relationship of Mary exists within our own perception.
Right.
So that's where you start to see, and this goes back full circle to your point about like, how do we experience everyone? Well, right. It's all us, So like, you're right. Awesome because, that's how I see you, which is really me. So I'm awesome.
Right. But we don't see things as they are. We see things as we are.
Exactly. So yeah, it gets pretty deep. I like that we've gone there straight away here.
I want to talk about listening, because okay. There's got to be more rules to it, right? Because there's one thing of just sort of listening.
Yeah.
But I can just sit here and listen to you talk the whole time and say, I listened to you.
Yeah. Okay.
But there's got to be more participation than that to being a good listener, right? There's got to be more to it than just sitting there and listening. Is it repeating back? Is it asking more questions? Is it like what is a good listener?
So no, it's a great question. I would just subtly change again because of words and we're being specific. You don't gotta do anything, right? Because gotta, have to, should, supposed to, must, all of those words carry resistance. Like, oh, I gotta do this and I've gotta finish my homework and I must do this and I've gotta, like none of those words are empowering. Like they're all disempowering. Sure. So there's no gotta. And I would say that if you're listening from a position of that, then you've already put a barrier because it's sort of an implied like task. Now I have to listen to my mother-in-law, or I should, I have to listen to my boss. So I would sort of get rid of any resistance first of all, and it wants to be an action of love, I would say. Yeah. And that would be one of the undercurrents that is imperative in order to be powerful listening, is that not only am I hearing like the physics of my ear sensing sound, but I'm getting what you're saying. That would be the deeper undertaking, which is to really get, because you could start telling me about something that's troubling in your life right now. And if I didn't have the undercurrent of sympathy, empathy, or the ability to relate to that, then I might be hearing what you're saying, but I'm not really understanding the depth of your own pain. So listening is where it's a container, a safe space where I'm also understanding the depth of your reality. It could be joy, it could be misery, it could be heartache, it could be grief. And of course, I get to do this a lot because people are telling me whatever's going on in their life, and invariably, if they're coming to see me, it's because things are a bit problematic. It's not always the case. Like, a lot of my athletes and high performers are thriving, but they know they could go to another level. So it's not necessarily something like some malaise or the life isn't this dark place. But to be able to really get like the depth of despair that people feel, like really understand how scared someone is, like that would be sort of listening X, right? That would be listening like where you really are holding space, embodying in your own experience, the degree to which you can, somebody else's reality. That's connection. That's resonance.
So putting yourself there to some degree, to embody means to feel it, right?
Yeah.
So going to a place where you felt fear or you felt sad,
Yeah.
to be able to relate to them at that level of emotion.
And that's where we talk about empathy and sympathy. And I think that also comes with maturity, right? It would be very difficult. My mum died when I was 7. It's going to be very difficult for me as a 7-year-old to have empathy for my dad's experience of losing his wife, because I don't have the wherewithal, I don't have the bandwidth to understand. I haven't gone through my own grief of someone who I love dying, of course, my mum, but at 7, I don't process that as a 7-year-old. So,
right.
And I think that's also where there's a lot of compassion with somebody's inability to listen. Like that's just where they're at, and that's a hard pill to swallow when you're in a relationship that perhaps where somebody is evolving and they're a better listener and perhaps their partner isn't so good. But it also might just point to the fact that maybe they haven't had so many experiences on the sort of the tapestry of human emotion, so they're unable to relate fully to what someone's going through.
So when you go through experiencing a new emotion, as you said, they maybe haven't experienced that before. Are you remembering how it feels, or are you actually getting the feeling for the first time? Let me back up by saying, as a concept, I believe that we are everything. Mm-hmm. We are the universe within, outside, so within, so without. As above, so below, we're the whole thing.
Yeah.
So it's more about remembering the feeling of familiarity, and that we have it inside of us, which is why we can feel it. Mm-hmm. So do we actually have to get how do we get there? How do we, you know what I mean? How do we get to relate to someone? Do we actually have to have the experience?
No, I think that could be helpful in terms of a visceral experience, but it can be just purely like the sentience, the understanding, the resonance of it. Mm-hmm. So I think it is a remembrance, right? And I think one of the reasons we have the world of perceived separation and diversity is that, going deeper again, what is consciousness, right? So one of my quotes, I love that we're just getting straight into the deep stuff. I say, the seeker is the sought, right? Which people are going to have to SOUGHT, not SORT.
Okay, I was like the sort. I'm trying to imagine.
The seeker is the sought. So what
the sought.
The sought. The sought.
Whatever.
I'm English, darling.
English. Proper English.
Proper English. The Queen's
Slang English.
Austin Powers English. Yeah, baby. The seeker is the sought. So what does that mean? So, the essence of who I am is that which I seek. So we could say that consciousness is just wanting to know itself. But, and I had this as an actual experience when I was in my little rent control apartment in Santa Monica. This is, prior to sort of what I could say was a big shift. I don't want to call it my awakening. That sounds very pretentious, but where I at least shifted gears in the way that I related to myself as a human being. I was just going for a run, or I'd just come back from a run. And I was leaning up against the wall, stretching one of my calves. So, my foot was back. You've done this, I'm sure, many times. And so my face is close to the wall, so I get a little bit of an angle, and I'm stretching my Achilles. And by virtue of the fact that my face was so close to the wall, I felt a little disoriented because there was no perspective. There was no point of relativity. And a lot of people experience this when they ski or snowboard, when the clouds are low and it sort of merges into the same tone of the snow, and you don't have any sort of point of perspective. There's no depth perception. Mm-hmm. And it becomes very disorienting, even nauseating.
Mm-hmm.
And at that moment, as I was stretching, it just gave me the epiphany of my own quote that without diversity, we don't know oneness, because oneness doesn't have an experience.